And it's time now to be joined by life coach Mark Fennell, where today Mark is going to be talking about anxiety. How do we manage it and what exactly is it? You know, it's something that is, I think it's becoming more and more common as our lifestyles become more frenetic and more hectic, and we're just under a lot more stress. And I remember, I think it was about 2 or 3 months ago, when I opened the show, I shared with the listeners that I was feeling very anxious, and I told you exactly what I was feeling, the impact it was having on me, because I think it's really important to talk about it. And the reaction I got was incredible, of people just saying thank you for talking about it. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about it and give you practical ways to overcome it. Mark, thanks for joining us on the programme this morning. The first thing is, Mark, is there a definition of anxiety? Because there's so many different levels of it. You know, there's kind of day to day and then there's more severe, but how would you define it?
Well, anxiety, ultimately, everybody will experience anxiety, right? So, you know, there's different levels of it. And I always say it like this: understanding when anxiety is a problem is when it affects your quality of life. That's in a simple, short answer to it.
So when it kind of stops you from doing things or makes you feel uncomfortable in different situations.
And when it's on prolonged periods of time. Because sometimes you have an exam the next day, you might lose a night's sleep over it. You know, it's not
That's
ideal.
normal.
But that's the human condition. That's normal. So that's not the end of the world. Anxiety in itself does affect people differently as well. For some people, it can affect their sleep and consume their thinking with ruminations and just obsessing over thoughts and so forth. But for other people, then it can affect maybe things like heart palpitations, sweaty palms, loss of appetite. Some people will even feel nauseous. Some people will even go as far as retch. So anxiety can affect... It's the same thing, but it affects people very, very differently and on very different levels, because two people could go through an experience, but for one person it could be traumatic. For the other person, they can just get over it.
They feel the experience in a different way. Does personality type have a lot to do with it, do you think? Or is it just sometimes it's internalised? You know, I'm thinking of the difference between me and my husband. My mum always calls me, "You're just a worry head." I mean, you use the word ruminate, and I think that's I'm not, of course, men ruminate too, but I just time and time again, you just hear women saying it's really interesting at night when they're going to sleep. If there's loads of worries going on, I'm up thinking about it, whereas my husband could just be gone, and he's very laid back kind of guy.
Yeah, it is. And for different strokes, different folks, right? What that means is that different things will affect us differently. For a girl, obviously, you know, you're more emotionally tuned in, right? You will see a situation, but you'll see the emotional weight of that situation probably a little bit more than some men. No, not all men, and that's not general, but that's just sometimes the way it is. So a situation or a conversation that goes bad can have a little bit more of an effect on a girl than it may on a guy. And it's not to say that all girls like that and all guys like that, but that's just, I suppose, in the scheme of majority of things, right?
But can you change, though, in a way, is part of it then, you know, your reaction to certain situations, whether they're stressful situations? Like, I'll give you an example. Something that makes me really anxious is being late. I hate being late. It wouldn't bother my husband, my mother, loads of people. But it does. Like, I genuinely feel a bit constricted. I just don't like it. I'm
the same. I'm exactly the same. I hate being late.
So there are certain triggers that we have that can trigger our anxiety.
There is.
Obviously, you'll probably just say, okay, well, you just don't be late. But sometimes it's outside of your control. But is there kind of habits that we can form that can help us to kind of lessen the anxiety that we feel?
Well, there is. And to answer your first question about personality type, some people are more susceptible to being or falling into a state of anxiousness over a situation. Everyone can fall into anxiety and probably will at some point, but it may not become a problem for them. I always kind of sum it up in a simple way: is it depends on, you know, sometimes people would say that always, you know, he or she, they're a real thinker, you know, they think about everything. I think as far as you go being analytical, if you're very analytical, as in you analyse things and you can think over, like we mentioned, rumination, you can sometimes be a little bit more prone to anxiety than someone who's more chilled or laid back and doesn't
because
think
you
on things.
Overthink things, basically.
Because you overthink. So it's like getting a small thing, putting a magnifying glass on it, and now in your head it becomes a lot bigger than maybe it really is. So that's just personality types. Yeah, you can be a little bit more susceptible to it. I will also just add in this little point. Your upbringing can also have a little effect on it. Your environment that you grow up in can have a little effect on it as well, because I used to work with young adults in the city centre, and they went through some really tough upbringings. They didn't get anxious over what some people who, and what would be considered a normal, like a road rage or something like that, or normal situations in life, not paying the bills, they didn't get anxious over it when they got older into adulthood, because they were used to, their anxiousness was when they were surviving. Do you know, that kind of way? So your upbringing kind of have effect on it, your tolerance level.
And that's something that psychologists are kind of talking about nowadays, especially with the kind of younger generation, that parents are kind of mollycoddling their children. Everyone's a winner in school, this type of attitude, that we're all a little bit cosseted, and that you get into the real world. And you know what? The real world is tough and it's stressful.
It is. And being streetwise can help you deal with, it's your tolerance level, you see. Being in a stressful situation. I use the term streetwise because if you're going through tough times, your tolerance level, your perspective is a lot greater and probably even stronger. And somebody who's not experienced much, difficult situations or had it kind of cushy can sometimes be more prone to suffering from anxiety, because now in their adulthood they realize, oh my goodness, this adult thing is crazy. What am I going through? How will I get through this exam? If I don't get through this exam, it's the end of life. But someone who's streetwise, that's like, oh, it's an exam, and they get a bit stressed, but they know, they keep it more in perspective. So your upbringing, it's not responsible, but it does play a part.
It has an impact, and you kind of need to kind of acknowledge that. So how would you, just for kind of day-to-day anxiety, whether it's, being late or being nervous about presenting at a meeting or whatever it is, how do you manage day-to-day anxiety that everybody experiences?
Well, you see, this is the thing. It's when it affects your quality of life, when it becomes not so day-to-day. It's every day, prolonged periods of time, sleep, your work, and when lots of things, relationships get affected, that's when it becomes a problem for you. But the day-to-day stuff, wouldn't qualify as a problem, but it's something that you just need to deal with. So that can be managed, I'll nearly say in-house, by yourself, right? And I will say the first and foremost thing is take a step back and realize that, being anxious, your physical state of anxiety started by your thinking, and reverse back up to your thinking and say, why did my thinking get into this state? Were you, conscious of something that's happening, something that's going on? Because sometimes you can get into an anxious state like a slow progression. It doesn't necessarily mean it was one specific thought. It doesn't necessarily mean it was one situation.
It's like the compound effect, basically.
It's basically, it compounds over time. Being in a constant state of go, lack of rest, lack of chill out time, being in that constant state, your body releases adrenaline to keep you up, to keep it going, because you're focused on what you're doing, so you're keeping it going, and you're basically, as the term goes, burning the candle at both ends. That can put you in a very vulnerable position to experience maybe an anxiety attack, or even further beyond, a panic attack. And quite often we hear the situations when people have experienced a panic attack. It was out of the blue, in a shopping centre, it was a day off, not even in the boardroom, and they can't understand it. And the reason, and I won't get into all of it today, but ultimately it's to do with prolonged periods of time of being in a should we say, a semi-anxious state for a long period of time.
And probably a lot of people are in that situation nowadays where they're not stopping enough, they're not resting enough, and even when they think they're resting, they're distracted, they're on social media, they're watching TV or Netflix or whatever, and they're not actually giving themselves a chance to just breathe
100%.
And stop. So our lifestyle is probably having a huge impact.
Lifestyle has effect. When you're on social media, you're still active. When you're, if you're watching, for example, and I remember reading the study that they got two people to chill out and watch a movie, right? Well, it was more than two people, it was a group of people, right? Can't remember exact figures, but here's how it went. They got one to watch like a thriller, high energy movie, and then they got another person to watch like a romantic sad movie, right? Well, it was like a soppy one, an easy paced one, right? The slower one had the greater emotional effect. The other one was just fast paced. And they ultimately did a study, and they watched heart rates and, all these algorithms and so forth. And they basically said watching romantics proved to be a lot more relaxing and actual deemed as rest time. And the other movie didn't seem as rest time at all. They said you're on high alert as if you were in a wild situation. So that's how powerful the eyes, the brain, the mind all works. It's triggered by what it sees and what it reads. When you're on social media scrolling, your brain is active. You're not actually switching off. You need downtime. Now, downtime can be, relaxing. Okay, we know about spa breaks, but we can't do spa breaks every week, or we can't do spa breaks every day. But getting the time to go for a walk proves so beneficial to you, just for 30 minutes.
Technology free.
Exactly. And if you can't switch your brain off, some people will walk, not even remember the walk, because they said, I was just thinking about the problem the whole time. Well, that's where you need to put on something that will engage you. So it can be something like, relaxing music. Not exactly fast-paced music. You're talking about stuff that's going to slow it down, distract the brain a little bit, get the thoughts off what you're thinking about. And doing that every day, ultimately, it can be 30 minutes a day, 20 minutes a day, even 10 minutes a day. You see all these apps now, breathe, take a time out and so forth, whatever. Or even just simply reading, but basically getting your mind off what it's on and time out for you where you're not engaging and you're at rest.
And the irony, of course, is probably we're less productive when we don't give ourselves those rest periods. So we just need to make it a non-negotiable. Just a final question to ask you, Mark, this morning, because we've been mainly focusing on just that kind of day-to-day anxiety. Just for people listening who are kind of wondering, is my anxiety kind of normal, and by that I mean just part of life, or is it actually a problem where I need to actually get further help for it? How do you know when you need to take that step?
Just going back on, like I mentioned about the quality of life, when it's starting to affect you, whether it be sleep, food, eating habits, if your weight is being affected, if you find that you're not being able to focus, or you're ruminating, you're thinking about the same thing or different variations of the same thing over and over and over, or if you're finding yourself catastrophizing in your thinking, a lot of the time, that can be a sign of anxiety. Don't worry so much about what you're thinking about, just deal with the fact that you are thinking about it a lot. So that means that you need to deal with it. That's when you need to speak about it. In fact, that's one of the main reasons I started the blog all those years ago. I had my own experience of anxiety, and I was like, I got to learn about this, discover this. And there was nothing out there at the time. This is a long time ago. It makes me feel old. But anyway, but I remember at the time, and I had to learn and study it and research it and all myself. And it just triggered off a passion in me. And I met other people and helped other people. That's why I started my website, markfennell.ie. But in recent months, I said, well, why not put this online and let's start the conversations. Give people, they may not be able to say it to, their friend or their family member just yet, but you know what? Well, they can direct message me on Instagram.
And even the thing of, I know you have on your Instagram page, which is Mark's Happy Place, lovely name, a 1-minute video giving 4 tips to manage anxiety. I think even people sharing those things, it's one thing sharing it, but if you share it and you say, this has really helped me, that takes us to a whole new level of where we need to be, where we can just talk about managing our mental health, not where we're talking about it or about somebody else, but where we're all acknowledging that, we all have mental health that needs to be looked after. So I think it's really good if we can get these things out there on social media and in person, where we can, if a colleague asks you, are you feeling okay? And you're not saying, no, I'm feeling a bit anxious today. And then that becomes more normal and acceptable, and we'll want to support and help one another.
Exactly. And just to go back on a little point I made about, upbringing can be a factor and environment can be a factor. Sometimes you'll have kids and children who deal with anxiety. It may be nothing to do with the parents' fault. So I don't want anyone thinking that, it's their upbringing is the problem. It can be something else. But ultimately, the simple answer about everything is get people talking. Let's not see it as a stigma or a bad thing. Let's just talk about it so that we can fix it, move on, and have a great life. Mark
Fennell, life coach, thank you so much for joining us. And if you want to connect up with Mark, as I said, his Instagram is Mark's Happy Place, or you can go to his website, markfennell.ie.